Why theory? In anthropology, theory can best be described as a guiding principle, general orientation, or intellectual framework. Throughout the history of anthropological theory, certain theorists have become canonized. This resulted in what we will refer to as schools of thought or lineages. Anthropologists utilize this concept to identify their theoretical ancestors and elaborate upon the theoretical frameworks of the past. I, as well as the book, encourage you to view this class as an opportunity to find your place in anthropology. Approach this class as a dialogue with the ancestors rather than a struggle to remember tidbits about dead dudes and pass another academic hurdle. Therefore, let me emphasize that humans are highly subjective creatures. Furthermore, the search for truth as empirical is rendered incredibly difficult. However, attempting to uncover increasingly more honest and refined answers to explain the human condition is a most honorable and lofty goal.
No fabric can be woven, nor clothing fitted, without first finding the wool with which it has been spun. The uniting fiber of our tradition rests within the nimble fingers of the philosophers of the ancient Greco-Roman world. The pre-Socratic philosophers concern themselves with the very nature of phenomena. Rather than depend upon a grand creator to set everything into existence, they sought to rationalize nature through nature. Thales proposed that everything came from water. Anaximander said that the cosmos' original substance was unknown and boundless. Empedocles posed a theory vaguely resembling natural selection, which claimed that the cosmos evolved as different elements encountered one another and formed larger bodies that survived, only if useful. Democritus theorized that the shape, size, and very nature of human variation resulted from the changes in the shape, size, and velocity of constantly moving universal particles he called atoms. It is important to note that Democritus, like many other pre-Socratic philosophers, believed that man had fallen from an age of technological advancement before this historical record. Another tradition that emerged was travel writing, popularized by Herodotus, referred to as the father of history. He recorded his observations of cultures abroad. The threads of ethnography, cultural relativity, and materialism can be found through his attempts to associate each unique culture's traditions with a geographical, climate, and nutrition correlate. He concluded that cultural difference resulted in pressures of the natural environment rather than divine acts. As democracy began to change the Greek socio-political landscape, the new philosophical schools of thought emerged. The Sophist school emphasized that practical skills and social effectiveness should supersede the search for any empirical truth. In layman's terms, let's only focus on something if it works for the majority of the people. The Sophists focused on the idea that life and behavior is dependent on circumstance. Once again, we encounter another thread that will lead us to our greatest guiding principle, cultural relativism. The Sophic schools also led to nihilism, which proposes that nothing is knowable and knowledge is only
produced by those in power. This concept is a defining feature of Marxism and the discursive theories of Michel Foucault.
Socrates, the only true wisdom consists in knowing that you know nothing. That's us, dude. Oh yeah. Let's bag him, yeah.
Socrates, however, was convinced that there were universal values. Through education and critical thinking, the mind can be trained to see through their cultural perceptions and not be enslaved by cultural conditioning. Plato proposed that in each culture, through years of change, it retained basic elements. Those elements, which remained static, were the essences of human nature. This thread can be followed later to reveal the fabric of structural functionalism and the idea of total social facts defined by Emile Durkheim. Later, we will learn in this semester. It is prudent to note that the thread of racial fixity has been spun from Plato's idea of transcendental essences. Overcoming a long legacy of racial fixity has been the greatest challenge of the 20th and 21st century evolutionists. Aristotle was considered a far more practically minded predecessor to Plato. Instead of looking for universal absolutes in humans, he instead concerned himself with attempting to reveal universal absolutes in nature. Aristotle focused on the relationship between people and natural objects. These things Aristotle perceived as knowable and much more important. This thread can be traced back to the fabric of cultural materialism, proposed by Marvin Harris in 1968, in which he popularized the concepts of the emic and etic, or emic and etic. Harris claimed that the etic explanation is knowable and is therefore emphasized in his research. Plato's concepts were incorporated into religious cults, such as the Abrahamic traditions, and Aristotle birthed the scientific movements, which traveled with his student, Alexander the Great. After Alexander's death, Greece began to decline. Epicurus followed the thread of Democritus, stating that humans and all of nature is comprised with atoms, and they are redistributed when one dies. This thought is a precursor to the first law of thermodynamics. Epicurus proposed that society was a utilitarian extension of humanity. Therefore, humanity supersedes society. This concept can be traced to our modern idea of individual human rights. In contrast to Plato, Stoics believed that the mind is not real. All that exists is matter, and the mind is simply growing to perceive matter. This thought is the fibers with which we spin the anthropological theory of the tabula rasa, or blank slate. Each human, it proposes, is born with no conceptualization of matter, and the individual must gain knowledge through experience. This leads to the concept that culture is not innate, it is learned and passed down. Stoicism is the bridge bringing us to the Roman thought on their ideas of political organization. The concept of cosmopolis, or a world citizenry, was popularized by Marcus Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. And they all encouraged personal achievement, but concluded that individuals should make their thoughts and actions accord with a universal societal goal. As Christianity gained steam, the most influential church father was the Bishop of Hippo in North Africa, St. Augustine. He, of course, stresses that humans are out of harmony with the cosmos. However, Augustine proposed that history is important and is linear, not cyclical or recurrent. There is a universal history, not just a history of nations. This thought wove the overarching themes of anthropology, in which time is spatial and temporal. Through this brief overview of ancient Greco-Roman philosophical thought, we can already see the establishment of the humanistic, scientific, and intellectual outlooks of anthropological theory.